Hello, today we are going to discuss about symbolism and its impact on British modern writing. French symbolism was a movement in France, as the name suggests. So, it was focused on building up imageries and symbols. And one of the major two writers of the movement was Charles Baudelaire and Arthur Rimbaud, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And this movement was significant in the later part of 19th century, 1870s and things like that. And it continued till the end of 19th century. So they wrote, it's a this was written against realism and naturalism. So in the mid 18th century, so realism and modernism, naturalism was introduced, where the writing was much more closer to reality. So, for example, read the, so the speech and writing, read, for example, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. So you would understand how painstakingly they have made it to feel real, so Jane Austen, brilliant writer, of course. So she has, so why people would go back to Jane Austen again and again? Because of the realistic, depiction of the people, characters present in the novel. So you would know those characters, and you might have felt for some of the characters yourself. So so that was the case of realistic and naturalistic writing in the 18th century, and and French symbolists, so they went away from it and try to build a narrative using a lot of symbols and images. And so the experience, this was the initial phase of so what we consider as modernism. So officially, we don't consider it as modernism, but so one of the major features of modernism is usage of symbols and imagery, right? So that too, a complex symbols and imagery, right? And French pioneered this particular technique. And so their focus was experience of individuals and inner emotions, and so how, it is much more about internalization. So rather than anything else, so instead of projecting it directly, you project it through different images. An image of a snake, a story which is unrelated to, for example, Leda and the Swan. In the entire poem, you don't read about what it is about. It just presents us a story from Greek mythology. And, but the message of the poem is not about Greek mythology. It has nothing to do with Greek mythology. It is about the present. And, so this is how images and symbols build a narrative. And so now you might have got a certain idea about what symbolism is, and what kind of images and symbols are used. So there is a reason why it happened. So when, see, until then, what happened was the nationality was a boundary. So when we say nationality was a boundary, so British and French fought against each other, and so there was little give and take between them. And another barrier is in terms of language. Though many fashionable British fancied French, general public did not understand French, and of course, French did not make much effort learning English. So language was a barrier. But in the in the late 18th century, in fact, early 19th century, no, late 19th century and early 20th century. So what happened was, um, these journals and magazines were very popular. And these journals and magazines were translated to different languages, so French to English, English to French, French to German, and so on. And that gave access for them to understand things all across the world. So that is why in the 20th century, things were so I mean, you can't actually see the boundaries because what happened in France influenced England immediately, almost immediately. And, that applies to other countries as well. So, when French, symbolists, came up with their writings, their new forms of writings, and, that of course influenced modernist writers, and you can clearly see you can clearly see the resemblance. And modernists, they changed it a little bit, So French, for example, Charles Baudelaire was very vocal regarding urbanization and how France has turned into a he call it as demonic city. So he was very clear on that. Some shades of it can be seen in other writings as well. Then of course, fear of war. It's constant. Throughout modern writings, it is constant. And regarding social morality, social morality, when we say it is not just about the ethics but also about the conventions which are present. So these are the three major things: urbanization, fear of war, and shifting social conventions. So these are the major concepts which are overlapping when it comes to British modernism and French symbolism. So what did how did it influence British writers? Let us try to understand. So for example, Charles Baudelaire, so he wrote about as example as quoted earlier. So he portrayed Paris to be a demonic city, right? And the kind of urban setting which he present in front of us, the degeneration of ideas, degeneration of ideals in a particular city which he presents, ugly images. So it, you can see the influence of it in T.S. Eliot's writings. Two examples can be Portrait of the Lady. The first couple of lines from Portrait of the Lady presents as the image of that this ugly part of the city. And of course there is an entire section of wasteland which mimics Charles Baudelaire's work. So we will discuss it anyway when we deal with Wasteland. And James Joyce, for example, James Joyce's work Ulysses, his master work Ulysses, he presents us the image of Dublin, the city of Dublin. And till date, people find it so find it astonishing that the how city is represented in his work, right? The city seems to be alive. Alive doesn't mean all good, of course. So you clearly see that this influence. And to an extent Virginia Woolf also incorporated the following themes in their writings, but not just in the content wise, but we need to understand the largest influence on modern writing was in terms of style, right? So modernists came up with experimental styles which were influenced by French symbolism. So that impact, some of the things which uh, are important here is the usage of symbols and images, so that is largely and directly influenced by French writings. Then stream of consciousness is a little bit it's a little bit derived from French writings. So there were French writings which were much more similar. Then most importantly, like things which are non-linear narrative, which we have already discussed. And most importantly, fragmentization, right? So if modernism can be summarized in one word, it would be fragmentization, right? So how for example, falcon cannot hear the falconer, things cannot hold, things fall apart. Where are the direct lines from second coming, so by W.B. Yeats. So So it is, I mean, of course, this is in the literal sense, they are speaking about fragmentization, but, even in style, there is fragmentization, right? Things are presented as parts. T.S. Eliot's poems, many of these poems are presented as part one, part two, part three. And, Wasteland is presented in five parts and, things like that. So fragmentization is a technique which is very innate in modern writings. And so there is a lot of chaotic and lot of chaotic and irrational things which are present in writing, which reflected the chaos present outside. So the chaotic the chaos present in the writing is purposeful to represent the chaos outside. So it is not a part of something, so an oversight, we can say. It is not, so that is what we can observe about the relation. Then, rejection of reality is something which we have to notice in modern writing, which of course is something which we all understand, we have all discussed. Then one more feature of modern writing is, so the phrase which we use for modern writing is, prose is more poetry like and poetry is more prose like. So this sentence is definitely true. And so poetry is much more prose like and prose is more poetry like. And so they are absolutely true. And so you can see that abundantly in the modern writings. So and so the forms of poetry, so there are literal lines which doesn't feel like poetry at all. And there are parts of prose where it is so beautiful that it is almost a poetry. So that is something which was largely influenced by French writings, and usage of psychology. So it was almost together, but French made it there first, but then British came there. Usage of psychology in writing, direct usage of psychological ideas in writing. And I have to give one example here, which I haven't given so far. It is Robert Louis Stevenson's, celebrated work, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is an amazing novel about multiple personality disorder. So, how it is probably, I might be wrong here, it is probably the first novel to represent such psychological disorder. So I mean, so that was, of course, Robert Louis Stevenson wrote in English, but so the initial writings of psychology were in French, and that was brought in by English writers. So and speaking of forms, so we have to mention Imagist movement. So in British writing, Imagist movement was pioneered by Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound is a great poet. We have to learn when talking about modern poetry. So Ezra Pound, he formally introduced a movement called as Imagist movement, where the focus was on building up images, presenting images, giving us an idea of something. So I mean, think about it. You might have already read many of the modern poems, and major poems of modern writing is just presenting one image after the other. So when images are presented one after the other, it makes us feel something. It gives us a picture, right? And this technique was developed by Ezra Pound, and that was implemented by almost all the writers of the time. And so that is very important. So through images you can convey complex ideas. Through description you might not be able to provide it. So images can present things which description can't. And so that is why this technique is very, very important. And Ezra Pound was quite successful in bringing it into forefront. So these are the major influence of French symbolism on British modern poetry. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.